International, www.netivyahinternational.org.
Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam, and we're continuing the weekly study of the Torah portions that are being read in every synagogue around the world. Together with Brad TV, this is a major project, and today, this next Sabbath, we'll be reading from Genesis chapter 12 on. And I want to go back a little bit to the background of this event that is a major event in the Bible, that God is calling Abraham and his family to leave their country, their family, their culture, their language, and essentially go on to a land that he doesn't even specify in the beginning that they have to go to. He just tells him, get up and go. Get up and go to a land that I will show you. Leave your father, your mother, your family, and go to a place that I will show you. No address is given to Abraham at the beginning. I think that this is a little bit funny, but it shows, first of all, Abraham's trust of God, and second of all, it shows a little bit of humor. If God would have told him, go to the land of Canaan, the land of Canaan that has so many different nations that have flocked in that narrow space between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Girgashites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Philistines. Abraham would have said, oh God, just a second, maybe you should send me in another direction. Send me to Switzerland. It's a much better neighborhood. So God doesn't tell him, says, go to the place that I will show you. Why? What happened between chapter 11 and chapter 12 of Genesis? I'll tell you what happened. Humanity, after the flood, came from one family. Noah's family, the survivors of the flood, that obeyed God and built a huge boat, a huge ship that housed in it the species of animals and birds that lived on this earth, except the fish and the animals that lived under the sea, under the water. All the species, including humanity that lived above, were wiped out in the flood. Now this is another issue. The flood is another issue that I talked about last week, but I'm going to repeat this point. The biblical story of the flood is not the only story of the flood in the ancient world. We have Sumerian myths and Babylonian myths and even myths from other continents in the world that tell a story very similar to the one of the flood. But that's something that belongs to last week's teaching. This week's teaching starts a new chapter. God had condemned the world for these reasons. One is humanity that was united with the same language and the same culture had decided that they don't want God to rule over them. They want to be independent. They wanted to have control of their own destiny. But they didn't want God to be a part of their destiny. So God consults somebody, like he did when he created man in the book of Genesis, beginning of Genesis. It says, let us go down, us, not I go down, let us go down and confuse the languages of the people. Before that, there was no Gentiles. They were all a part of the same human family. No nations. What comprised the nation is language, territory, and constitution or culture. So when the humanity was divided into languages and territories, it created nations. And all the human beings in the world were a part of this structure of nations. But they were all under a curse, the curse that God put on humanity in the Tower of Babel, divided them. They were united, and God divided them into nations. And in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verses 4 through 7, tells us that God divided the human beings, the human race, and allotted to each one his own territory, not only his own language, but his own territory. And that created nations. Not only that, but in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19, it says that God, they didn't want him to be their ruler, to be their God, to be the one that sets the norm of what it means to be children of God, what it means to be under the authority of God. And therefore, he divided to the nations that were divided in the Tower of Babel, to each one not only his language and his territory, but also his, what they're going to worship, the stars and the moon and the sun and other elements and creatures of this world. But for Israel, for Jacob and his family, he chose that they are going to be his lot. And that was in chapter 11. In chapter 12, God calls Abraham and his family to leave their country. And he gives Abraham and his family 3 blessings, 3 promises, I should say. The first one is that he's going to be with him and with his family. The second one, that through his family, through his seed, which at that time he didn't have any seed yet, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. All the families of the earth. The same promise is repeated several times in the book of Genesis. It's repeated to Abraham several times, like in chapter 15, and in chapter 13, and in chapter 22, and then to Isaac in chapter 26 of Genesis. So this promise is not repeated one time. It's repeated several times by God to Abraham and to Abraham's seed, more than any other promise in the Bible. And so promised him a seed. He promised him a blessing from the seed to all the families of the earth, to all the nations of the earth. And he promised him the land. And he gives the borders of the land. And we're going to get to it further down the text. Now, together with Abraham, what a lot of our Christian brothers don't realize, came the souls which we had made in Haran. In the same chapter 12 of Genesis, the souls which he made in Haran. Now, in Hebrew, to evangelize is to make souls, la'asot nefashot in Hebrew, to make souls, to gain souls, you could say, instead of to make. To gain souls. Now, it's interesting, at the end of the book of Genesis, in chapter 48 of Genesis, we read in the text, chapter 48, verse 16, we read in the text that Jacob is telling Joseph and his sons the following: "And the angel who redeemed me from all harm means an angel of the Lord, or somebody sent by God who redeemed me from all harm. Bless these children, in other words, the children of Joseph, that they may be recalled or called in the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth. Now, the word multitudes in the Hebrew text is a very interesting word. In Hebrew is va'idgu. The root is dag. Dag is fish. The translators in this context of the Bible to other languages didn't understand the term. What does it mean that they would fish among the nations of the earth? They didn't understand it, so they translated, what is fish? Fish multiplies. One fish can send thousands of eggs into the water, and fish multiplies, so they translated multiply among the earth. But this is the source of Yeshua's statement to his apostles when he sends them to become fishers of men. Like who? Like Abraham. That's an interesting thing that, most people who don't know Hebrew and don't understand the Hebrew Bible miss because of the translations. So together with Abraham came a multitude of people. The souls which he had made, he has evangelized in Haran. That within itself is a very interesting issue. How many souls did he evangelize? How many people came with him from Haran together with Sarah and Lot and his family to the land of Canaan? Well, we have a story, not in this portion, but in the portion following, in chapter 14 of Genesis, that Lot had moved from the mountainous area of the central ridge that starts in the Jezreel Valley, starts south of Nazareth and ends up in Hebron, central backbone of the land of Israel. Lot moved to the Dead Sea. What today is the Dead Sea. It wasn't dead at that time. It was the most fertile part of the country. Lot moved with his flocks and with his shepherds and with his family to the most fertile part of this country, which was before it became a Dead Sea after the upheaval of Sodom and Gomorrah. Maybe kind of a huge nuclear event that turned over the most fertile part of the land into the harshest desert in this part of the world, the Judean desert. So how many people did come with Abraham? That group that is called the souls which he had made in Haran. How many people? Well, we know that in chapter 14, when Lot is captured by the 5 kings that came from the area of Damascus from the north, Abraham chases to bring Lot and his family, to save Lot and his family back. He chases those 5 kings and he has a small army. How many people? 318 men between the age of 20 and 50, the army age, that could fight. He chases those 5 kings and rescues Lot and his family. 318 men, soldiers between the age of 20 to 50, which were a part of the people that came with him from Mesopotamia. Well, men between the age of 20 and 50, usually in that area, and even today, most of them are already married with children. So if you add to 318 men, soldiers, 1 wife each, and 1 child each, you've arrived to 1,000 people that Abraham evangelized in Haran, in Mesopotamia, and they came down to the land of Canaan with him. That's why he never lived in the city. If he was a family of 4 or 6 or 8, they could have lived inside the city, inside the walled areas. No, he always lived outside the cities, in Elon Moreh and Alonei Mamre, outside of the city of Hebron, outside of the city of Shechem. That's where Abraham lived, in his own encampment. And the same continued with Isaac and with Jacob. They were not small families the way we envisioned them. They were a tribe of people, even bigger than a normal tribe. So, Abraham leaves the land that he grew up in. Look, Ur, we know about Ur, what kind of city it was. Ur of the Chaldeans. It's in Iraq, sitting on the great rivers of the Euphrates, between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. The Jordan River would look like a ditch compared to the Euphrates and the Tigris. Yeah? It would look like what the Americans would call a creek. Not a river, not even a river. They would call it a creek compared to the great rivers of Mesopotamia. Imagine this. Abraham leaves Ur, which was like leaving New York or Mexico City or Sao Paulo, Brazil. Yeah? And he comes to this land, which is a total mess. It's got all these nations from Europe, Aryans, like the Hittites, and Perizzites, and Girgashites, and Amorites from Asia. And they're all city-states fighting with each other, jockeying for control of this small piece of land. And he lands in this land that is a total mess. I often joke and say, if God would have really loved the Abraham and his seed, he would have sent them to Switzerland. It's a much nicer neighborhood, greener country, water plenty. This is a semi-desert land. And politically, it was a mess in the days of Abraham, and it remained a mess throughout the history of Israel. Our neighbors have never accepted us. They didn't accept us, they didn't accept Abraham, they didn't accept Ezra and Nehemiah when they returned from Babylonian exile. They didn't accept us until today. So if God would have loved us, he would have sent us to Switzerland. But no, he didn't. He sent us to this piece of land, and he gave it to us in this Torah portion in chapter 13, verse 15 of Genesis. He gave it to us as a perpetual inheritance. Perpetual inheritance. Chapter 13, verse 15. I'm going to read it to you from the Hebrew translation of the text, not from the King James, but from the Hebrew translation. I'm reading from chapter 13 from verse 14 on. And the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had parted from him, raise your eyes and look out from there, where you are, to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. For I give all the land that you see to you and to your offsprings forever. And I will make your offsprings, your children, as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, then your offsprings too can be counted. Look at the promise. Give this land forever to your offsprings. Listen, I believe the Bible from Genesis chapter 1, the first word in the beginning, to the last words of Revelation chapter 22, which also has to do with a promise of God that Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem that comes down from heaven down to this earth, will be an eternal city for all the believers to be, come there to worship God. So I believe the words that God tells Abraham here, and again in chapter 15, and again in chapter 22, and again in chapter 26, and again and again and again and again and again. He repeats it to Jacob all the way down to chapter 28 of Genesis, and all the way to the end of the book of Genesis, and again through the prophets of Israel. Dear brothers and sisters, this reading of the Torah, which I again want to encourage you to read the portions of the Torah that we are talking about. I'm only able to use around 20 minutes to touch the highlights, but the details are great and very important. So if I'm going to summarize what we said, first of all, God called Abraham to start a new nation that was not under the curse of the Tower of Babel. A fresh nation. A nation that will restore all the nations back to God through Yeshua HaMashiach, through Jesus Christ, that sent his disciples at the end of his ministry to all the nations to do what? To teach them, to share with them good news, and to teach them to observe everything that he, our Messiah and our Lord, commanded them. That's what the commission was to his apostles. And that's what they did. They spread around the world, took the teaching about the oneness of God and the participation of the Messiah in the divinity of God, and the spread of God's word all the way to the last Indians in the Amazon River Valley, if you wish, to all the world. And we are going to continue these studies of the Torah together with Brad TV, and I want you to, schedule your time to watch these presentations of the Torah, to think about them, to pray about them, and to stand with us in Israel and with Brad TV that is taking this initiative to do this great project that will last a year, 54 or 55 sessions of these weekly presentations of the Torah portions. God bless you, and shalom from Jerusalem.
Netivyah International, www.netivyahinternational.org.